Donald Trump is underwater on basically every single issue he ran on in 2024. We're talking about Trump. He, of course, at least constitutionally, can't run for another term, but his Republican Party is up in the midterm elections. They should be scared. SH blank, blank, blank list.
Over the course of President Donald Trump's second term, CNN's Harry Enten has pretty objectively, if you ask me, covered Trump's approval ratings. And he's given Trump credit when his ratings are up. But that's not what's happening today. As of right now, as you just saw, Trump's approval ratings are pretty catastrophic across the board. And honestly, if you've been paying attention, especially with the divisions within Trump's own base, you wouldn't really be surprised about this. But let's get granular here. Let's figure out what's going on. And we'll start with Trump's polling on the biggest headline in the news right now, the Epstein files. Let's watch.
Let's take a look at Trump's net approval rating on the issue. Look, they're all in red. They're all in the negative territory. But on immigration, he's 5 points underwater. Foreign policy, 8 points. Trade and tariffs, he's 17 points. The economy, 18 points. But look at the Epstein case. He is 39 points below water on the Epstein case. His net approval is 39 points in the negative. My goodness gracious. Approve of the Trump admin on the Epstein case in early July, right when you had those DOJ droppings, right? It was 17%. Look at where we were by late September. The latest poll I could find it, 20%. Republicans who approve of Trump's job as president, 87%. That is basically in line with the long-term average, 85, 90, 95%. But look at the Trump admin's job on the Epstein case. Just 45% of Republicans, less than half of Republicans are even buying what the administration is telling. Simply put, it is his worst issue by far.
That percentage of Republicans, 45% approve of how Trump is handling the Epstein files. That's amazing. That is amazing. Because sometimes we'll do stories about how Trump is performing on, let's say, immigration. Immigration is a perfect example, right? And the results of the poll will say like, oh my God, 65% of Americans don't approve of how Trump is handling immigration. But then once you take a look at how, it's divided or divvied up based on political identity, it's like 98% of Democrats disapprove, 55% of independents disapprove, but like most Republicans obviously approve. That's not the case of this situation with the Epstein files. And it probably also has to do with the fact that promises were made, but promises weren't kept. And more importantly, he refuses to really take any responsibility for how he's handled this situation. He just wants people to stop talking about it. That's not gonna happen. And he is refusing to take any responsibility for the fact that his own base is absolutely furious about this. So yesterday, he wrote on Truth Social, the Democrats are trying to bring up the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Not just Democrats, Trump, not just Democrats. A lot of Republicans are also bringing up the Jeffrey Epstein files. It's not a hoax. We've been reading some of his emails that have been leaked recently. But anyway, Trump continues to say, because they'll do anything at all to deflect on how badly they've done on the shutdown and so many other subjects. Only a very bad or stupid Republican would fall into that trap. Nice. So go ahead and also insult large swaths of your base as stupid and very bad. I'm sure that'll work out real well for you. But Trump has no safe harbor apparently, because as you saw in the last clip, his approval ratings are poor for all of the major issues that quite frankly, voters thought he would be better on. That's why he won the popular vote. That actually brings us to the economy. That's his second least popular issue. Take a look.
You go back to October of 2024, who did Americans trust more in inflation, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? They trusted Donald Trump by 9 points on average. You jump over to this side of the screen, those same exact polls have him way, way, way underwater, 26 points underwater on his net approval on inflation. More responsible for the current economy, Trump or Biden? We're talking 54%. The clear majority of voters say Donald Trump's more responsible for the current economy than just 21% who say Joe Biden. I will note, I've seen this in poll after poll after poll. Trump attention to lowering costs, not enough. We're talking about 3 in 4 Americans, 75% overall, who say Trump's not paying enough attention to lowering costs. And even among Republicans, that solid Republican base who oftentimes approves of Trump's job by 85, 90%, 57% of them say that Trump's not paying enough attention to lowering costs.
You know, Donald Trump is looking like my favorite frying pan. All right. Teflon has totally worn out. I'm kidding. I don't use Teflon pans. They're really bad for you. You shouldn't use them. But nonetheless, Teflon Don no more. And it's such a relief, guys. Now, look, to be fair, he did handle the economy better in his first term. Like, he wasn't so brazen in how much disdain he has for the American people in his first term. In the second term, he's going balls out. He doesn't care. And no, he hasn't focused on affordability at all. In fact, he has decided to take a bad situation, an inflationary economic environment, and make it worse through his ridiculous Liberation Day blanket tariff policy, which, of course, is being challenged in the Supreme Court at the moment. And hopefully the Supreme Court remembers that even though Congress is at this point useless and they've ceded so much power to the executive branch, it's still supposed to be a co-equal branch of government, and they're the ones who get to decide taxes, and tariffs are taxes. Now, I'm sure Trump had a little more leeway in his first term because he did targeted tariffs. That's not the case this time around. And so everyone's hoping that the Supreme Court, makes the right decision and passes down the right ruling. We'll see what happens with that. But again, that's huge. 57% of Republicans are not happy. They don't think Trump has done much to deal with affordability. That's not good for Trump. Look, more importantly, that's not good for JD Vance, because we know how Kamala Harris was hurt in her campaign because she had difficulty distancing herself from Joe Biden. Now, in my opinion, she wasn't a great candidate in general. But her inability to distance herself from the Biden administration because she was the VP hurt her. So just something to keep in mind. Now, when you look at the data, you can also see that despite all of this chaos and the havoc in Trump's first term, Americans actually were comparatively doing better. This is before the COVID pandemic. Obviously, the COVID pandemic was a complete and utter disaster for the economy. But prior to that, Americans were comparatively doing better. They were better off when he left office than they were, after Biden's term. So here's some info from the Wall Street Journal. Total household net worth rose 19% through Biden's first 3 years in office, according to Federal Reserve data, not much less than the 23% through Trump's first 3 years. So they're not including the COVID pandemic, and I think that's the fair thing to do here. However, adjusted for inflation, net worth was up just 0.7% through Biden's first 3 years, compared with 16% through Trump's first 3 years. Look, obviously, I have a lot of negative things to say about how Trump is governing the country. So please don't take this as a blanket defense of Donald Trump. But I will say this, and I want particularly those in the audience who consider themselves on the left to remember. In COVID and the COVID lockdowns happened in March of 2020 when Trump was still in office, obviously. And what happened after that were multiple rounds of, economic relief for Americans, including the stimulus checks, yes. But more importantly, the federal government decided to bolster state unemployment benefits. So Americans who were forced to stay home because of the government not the government, but the business shutdowns and all of that, were able to pay their bills. So it doesn't surprise me that after he left office, net worth for individuals in this country was a little higher. And those unemployment benefits, I'm just gonna say it because my husband was a bartender at the time and he lost his job, were generous. Now, of course, most lawmakers, especially Republican lawmakers, think they were way too generous, and they point to our national debt as justification for why they feel that way. How about we stop going to war? How about we stop funneling our resources to Israel? How about we stop, bombing Middle Eastern countries on behalf of Israel? I mean, we didn't have any debt when George W. Bush came into office. After 9/11 and after everything we did in the Middle East, that's when our national debt skyrocketed. So I think making Americans whole after the government has decided to force shutdowns in response to a global pandemic is the right thing to do. And to Trump's credit, in his first term, he did do that, along with lawmakers in Congress, of course. But this time around, homeboy do not care. He does not care about you at all. He's brazen about it. It's obvious. And it's hurting him in the polls. It is what it is.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live shows.